In this session of JavaScript, we'll understand more about variable declaration using the where statement. And we'll understand this from the perspective of scope, reassignment, redeclaration, and hoisting. Now let us see various ways in which we can create variables in JavaScript. There are three ways in which we can create variables. One is using the where, the let, and the const. Let us now understand more about where, let, and constant using the scope, reassignment, redeclaration, and hoisting. So let's get started. A variable declared using the where is at function scope. Okay, let's take a look at what do we mean by function scope. So let's create a variable called v1 and assign some value. In this case, I'll assign the value of global to it. Okay, so this is at this point in time global scope. Okay, now once you have this information, I could log it using the console.log statement, and I'll click on this run button here, and you will see the global getting printed onto the console window. Now at this point in time, even if I simply come to this console window in here and simply type in as v1, you will see that the output is global, right? Now this indicates that this v1 variable is attached to the window scope. Okay, so in this case it's either global or window scope. Okay, now maybe I could come back to this output window in here and type in as window.v1. This will output the same thing in here, right? Proving that anything that is declared with where is at the window scope. Okay, it's either at the window scope or it will be at the function scope that we will shortly see now. So now let's create a function. I'll call this function as f1, and within this function I'll create a new variable called f1 again, and I'll assign some value in here as f1 and v1 just to distinguish it. Now inside this function, if I try to log the value of v1, okay, maybe I'll kind of put some meaningful information indicating that we are within this f1 function, and I'll try to log the v1 variable, right? So this will output the value as f1 v1, right? So maybe once I create this out, and once I am outside this function, I'll invoke this function by keying in the function name followed by the opening and closing parenthesis. Now once I do this, I'll clear it out and click on the run button in here, and you can see the output in here is f1 v1 and not the global value that is stored in the v1. Now the thing that is happening like this way is because right within this function, whenever you access a variable, an object, or a function, the first thing that JavaScript engine does is to check the local scope. Okay, in this case the local scope is the scope of this function, right? And right within this function it finds a variable called v1 and then it prints the value. Okay, so there is no direct way to access this outside v1 at this point in time, right? But then what I could do is I could come within this function in here and write in one more console.log. Again we are within the f1. Now herein I'll say window.v1, right? Now this window.v1 will point to the variable defined outside this function, right? So in this case the value of this should be global. So I'll clear out my output window in here and click on run again, and you will see the correct value coming out in here again, right? So this is just a small thing you have to be aware of. Now let us try a couple of more things. Now right within this f1 function I'll create one more variable called v2, and I'll assign a value as f1-v2. Okay, now we know that right within this f1 function this v2 variable will be accessible, right? Maybe I can come in here and put in a comma in here. Okay, and I'll output v2 as well. Okay, now if I come back in here and clear the window and click on run, you will see the output coming out correctly, right? So you have the f1, you have the value of the v1 as well as the value of the v2 as well. Now this v2 function is scoped to f1 and not to the global. Okay, for example, if I come back in the console window in here, and if I try to log say window.v2, you will see it is undefined, right? Because the scope of the v2 is the containing function, which is f1 in this case. Okay, that means this v2 will not be available outside this function, right? So maybe if I come back in here and try to log in say outside and try to log in v2, you will get undefined as well. Okay, you get undefined, or maybe in this case you get the reference error v2 is not defined, right? Because outside the f1 function the variable v2 is not defined. Okay, so please be aware of this. Whenever you create a variable within a function using the var keyword, it will always be restricted to the scope of the function, and outside the function these variables will not be available. Now let us try out couple of more activities on this function. So now right within this function I'll create one more function. Okay, now this is a nested function and I'll call this function as f2, and within this f2 I'll create a new variable called v f2 var. Again, assign some random values in this, maybe inside f2. Okay, now right within this function I can access this value, right? So I will say f2 and print the value f2 var. Okay, and then right outside this function I can invoke the f2 function in here like this. Okay, now if I execute this code by clicking on the run button in here, you can see the message here inside f2. Okay, and ignore this error. This error is because of this console.log in here, right? I'll comment out this code, click on clear and run this code again, right? You can see the message inside f2. Okay, and these values are coming out correctly here, right? So now if you think for a moment, the f2 var is scoped to the f2 function. Now this f2 function will have access to all the variables declared within this function as well as within the parent function as well, right? That essentially means I can come in here and also log the value of v2 as well. Okay, because this v2 will be available to the child function, right? So if I clear this and run this again, you can see the value of v2. Okay, I can also access the global variable right within this nested function, but make a note that outside this nested function, right within the f1 function, you cannot access any of the variables that you declare within the child function, right? For example, if I come outside this function and try to log this within the context of this f1, maybe if I try to access f2.var, you will get a reference error, right? So if I click on clicker and execute this, you get a message f2 var is not defined, because within the context of this f1 it doesn't have access to this f2 variable that is actually private to the f2 function. Okay, so please make a note of this, and this proves that this function variable defined using var is actually scoped to the function. Okay, now let's see the behavior when we do the reassignment onto the variable that is defined using the var keyword, right? So we have this var v1 which was global, right? So I'll kind of update this value and say new global. Okay, and then if I try to log this value v1 and if I click on run here, okay, you can see the output in here, right? But there is an error called f2 var, right? So let's comment out the code here because this code is not required in this specific code. Now I'll clear out the window and run it again, so you get the value or output new global, which is stored within a variable called v1, right? So variable that is declared using var you can reassign as well, right? That is, you can change the value. In fact, that is the whole intention of variables, right? These values varies according to your requirement and situations. Now let us see whether you can redeclare the values again. Now let us see whether we can redeclare the variables or not using the var. So we already have this v1 variable created, right? Let's try to redeclare it again. So I'll say var v1 and I'll assign some new value, right? I'll say global 2. Okay, and then I try to log this value as v1. I'll clear the window and click on run, and you get the new global 2 value printed in here, right? That essentially means if you are declaring variable using the var keyword, you can redeclare it at any point in time, right? And the runtime, the JavaScript engine will not throw any error. Okay, it will happily accept this value. Now before this, if I try to print the value, you will see the value was new global, right? This v1 was new global, right? And after redeclaration, the value is changed to global 2. Okay, now let's talk about hoisting and how the behavior of the variables declared with var happens in this hoisting scenario. Okay, now let me show you what hoisting is all about. Okay, so I'll say write a code in here. Maybe I'll try to log a variable called variable v3, which is not yet declared, right? Now at this point in time, if I try to run this code, you will get the error that v3 is not defined. Okay, and this is the behavior that you are expecting. Okay, but then what I'll do is, after using the variable, I'll try to declare this variable, right? I'll put some value v3 value. Okay, now if I execute this code, okay, essentially at this point in time you should have got the error message reference error, but then if you take a look at the output now, what you are getting is undefined, right? That essentially means you are not getting the reference error. So for some reason the variable is available but the value is not initialized. Okay, this is because of the concept of hoisting, right? Now what happens in this hoisting is this exact same piece of code get translated into the below code when the hoisting happens, right? So final output will be, after hoisting, this above piece of code will look like var v3 console.log v3 and then v3 is equal to v3 value. This is what happens when you hoist a variable, right? So all the declarations of the variable will move to the top level scope. Okay, and so in this case the top level scope is the window, so all this variable declaration happens at the window level. Now if you had functions, then all the variables would have been moved to the top of the function, right? This is variable hoisting. Okay, so let's see some more examples of variable hoisting now within the context of function. Okay, now let us write a function called hoisting. Okay, I'm just giving it a name as hoisting. Feel free to name it anything. Now right within this function I will try to log something, right? So I'll say console.log and I'll say log maybe say age. Okay, so at this point in time, if I try to invoke this function, it will get the message that this reference error age is not defined, right? That will be the output. Reference error age is not defined. Okay, let me come inside that function now and let me write an if statement. If false, okay, and if false, I will create this variable called age and maybe assign some value here. Okay, now at this point in time, if I clear the output and click on run, now you are getting undefined instead of the reference error, right? This is because of hoisting, right? Now what happened during the hosting process is this exact piece of code that you see here has been transformed into what is displayed onto the screen, right? So maybe I'll just display it here. So this code is like this now, where age, okay, and then within this if block this age will be initialized. Okay, so this is the before code and this is the code after hoisting, right? Because since we are within a function, this variable declaration moved to the nearest scope, which is the function scope, right? That's where this variable is defined. Now at this point in time, you see the execution of this hoisting, the moment the variable is defined in here, and if you try to log it out, the default value of this unassigned variable will be undefined. Okay, now I hope that this hosting concept is clear as well, right? So it's a simple process of moving all the variable declarations to the top of the function. Now one final thing about variable hosting. So let's kind of come in here and say comment out this hosting code and say let's create a variable now, right? And a loop. So I'll say for var I is equal to 0, I is less than say 10 and I plus plus. Okay, so I have a simple for loop in here and within this loop I will print the value of I. Okay, so at this point in time, if I run this application, you will see the value of I getting printed, right? 0 to 9, right? Now the interesting thing in here is if I come outside this for loop and try to log the value of I, so let's see the output here. Okay, so if I run this application again, you will see the output of the I is 10, right? So this is because once this for loop was executed, the last value of the I was 10, right? Now since this variables created using the var is hoisted, right? It's hoisted to the nearest function or to the global object, right? In this case there is no function surrounding this for block, so the nearest parent is the window, right? So that's where this variable is being hoisted to, right? For example, if I come back to this console window in here, and if I type in as window.I, you will get the value as 10. Okay, this again proves that variables created using var is scoped to the function or to the nearest parent, in this case the window object.